Yesterday, I tried to do the hardest books I've read tag like event. Um, Ended up talking so long about explaining why a particular book that would make sense to tag I did not put on my list. So I decided to cut that short. It was a half hour. I hadn't even got to my list yet. This tag was created by, or actually, I was not tagged by anybody. The first one I saw was Alan at Hardbooks 770. Um, I talked about. I apologize. I have to go over this quickly because probably not everybody saw my video yesterday. But the tag was created by Paul at the Accidental Bookseller, which is a new channel to me. In fact, I haven't even subscribed yet. I'm subscribing right now, Paul. Thanks for this great subject. I had a hard time doing it, a very hard time, because I don't want to repeat everything I said yesterday, but to do the spirit of the tag, I had to think of books that I had a difficult time with that I felt it was worth the time. And frankly, a lot of the time, I don't work very hard. I don't read anything that's that hard for me. Uh, I guess I'm not in school. I believe I've picked up The World is Will and Representation by Schopenhauer, I think. I didn't finish it. There were other books I talked about in the other video that I didn't finish, so I can't count those. There are books that I hated that I forced myself to finish because they were part of the zeitgeist, books that came out at different times that I felt I should read. The Hunger Games books. I knew a lot of people who were reading the Hunger Games, and I was at that time trying to write science fiction, and so I was going to classes, things with people, and they were all nuts about the Hunger Games. So I forced myself to read those, uh, just because people read them. At another time, I was going into a 6 week writing program in 1999, I think it was, and I knew there'd be a lot of fantasy writers there, high fantasy writers. So I felt like I really needed to read Lord of the Rings just because I had never read it. The reason I never read it is I tried to read The Hobbit in junior high school. I barely got through it, barely got through The Hobbit. And people even at the time told me, who recommended that, they're like, well, you should just skip to Lord of the Rings because it's much better. And you can go back and read The Hobbit if you want because you'll love Lord of the Rings. But I had this kind of linear thing, and I was so exhausted by trying to get through The Hobbit, which I didn't like at all. Who knows why? I can't remember now. It was just very dull. It wasn't Conan. It wasn't Conan. It wasn't Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser, which is my kind of fantasy. But I really liked and appreciated Lord of the Rings when I read it. I guess I was around 38 or something. So they were right, people in junior high who told me just read Lord of the Rings if you can't get through The Hobbit. The Lord of the Rings is much better, but it's not how I thought about things. So The Hobbit kept me from going on to the other books, so I can't really count that. So what am I going to count? Okay. These first two books also not that hard to read, but they do. I'm going to stand them in for all the Russian novels, the great Russian novelists, Tolstoy, Turgenev, Dostoevsky, that era. Start with Turgenev. Start with Fathers and Sons. If you haven't read any Russians and you're concerned about the difficulty, because the only difficulty in reading the Russian novels is the names, in my opinion. The sheer and the big books have a sheer number of characters. Thinking back, the first Russian novel I read because I wanted to read it because it was the most famous novel in the world, and I was in Thailand, traveling around, and it was this is when I was 21 or something. And there was a Penguin 2 volume edition, part one and two of, I almost said War of the Worlds. Could you imagine? Two part War of the Worlds, part one and two, 50 pages each. Um, War and Peace. That would be a good time to read it. I would have nothing else to distract me because you didn't have ebooks in that time or anything. So I carried it around. It took me quite a long time to read it because of all the, you know, drugs and partying and everything at that time, uh, alcohol and drugs. But it was every night I would look forward to finally getting, back to this hut. We were staying in all these groups of huts, different people. It's in Koh Samui. I think it probably took me felt like a month or 2 months to read, maybe even longer. It's a fantastic book. It's no more difficult than Lonesome Dove or any other long book, except for one thing. That's the names. The names will drive you nuts. And at that time, I didn't, I believe there were names. There were probably some names in the front of the book. Actually, the names in War and Peace, looking back on it compared to other novels, are not as difficult as, say, Anna Karenina. Because in War and Peace, you have a lot of characters who are not related. In a lot of the Russian novels, you have like every character is related, or. So what I'm listing here is the two most recent Russian novels I've read, which are by Dostoevsky, and I read these maybe, I think probably just before I started the channel. The Idiot and Demons, or sometimes called The Devils or other names. But we'll go with Demons because, and they're both damn good books. The Idiot falls off in the final third or the final half. I can't remember how many sections it is. The first sections are fantastic. When this young nobleman comes back, this young Prince Mishkin, I think, comes back. He's been in a sanitarium in probably Switzerland. Comes back to Russia. So he has to go around, and he's very wealthy, and he's the idiot. He's very naive. He's very, well, not even naive. He's just very innocent. And he has to go around. He has to meet. He meets a couple characters on the train who become involved with him. He has to go. He goes to his relative's house. He has to meet all his relatives. He meets a lot of people, and it's very tough to keep the relation. It's very tough to keep the characters straight uh, because there's so many of them, and the names are very difficult for Americans. Demons is even tougher, I think, because you've got this group of revolutionaries. You've got these older people that are involved. These books were written in the middle of his career, so they are difficult to read in the sense you have to keep stopping it and think, okay, who is this person? Is this his aunt's sister, or is this her stepson? Or it's a pain in the ass to get used to. That's why I recommend maybe read Fathers and Sons first if you just want to get into Russian novels. I don't know why I'm assuming that people are reading this for information about what they want to read, but let's pretend that my opinion matters. Another way to get into it is by reading Chekhov, the plays of Chekhov, like The Cherry Orchard or one of those. You've got a family and stuff, but it's easier. Uncle Vanya, you usually got a family on an estate. What's the other one? Um, those are easier to read because it's just straightforward, the names of the person speaking. And just kind of build up your tolerance for all the Petroviches and the Peters and Annas and because the names are different. They have diminutives. They have people referred to by different people based on their relationship and often by just their first name. And so that can be really hard in the Russian novels, but I really don't think people should let that dissuade them, because it's not like the books are, for example, The Idiot. I really think The Idiot must have been influenced heavily by Dickens. It's very much a Dickens type novel, Dickensian novel, where this prince walks around. He meets some characters, quite humorous episodes, some quite uh, pernicious people. It's a bit episodic. People claim he owes them money, and different things happen. So it's quite like a Dickens novel, and um, it's not just deep philosophy. It's just not heavy philosophy. I read the Brothers Karamazov. I read that very long ago, and I probably didn't get as much out of it as I should have. That one's a little more deep philosophy, but all the other Russian books I've read are full of scenes of people, living their lives and having conflicts, just like in any other novel. It's not like these heavy, well, they are heavy sometimes, but it's not like these deep philosophical questions the way they're parodied in, say, a Woody Allen movie, or the way a Bergman film is. So they're really worth reading, but start with some of the shorter ones. Both Dostoevsky and Tolstoy wrote a lot of novella length things. The Death of Ivan Ilyich is one by Tolstoy that people enjoy to read. He wrote some great biographies of his early life, childhood, boyhood, and youth. They're all in one collection. There's another short one called The Cossacks. I think it's in either Youth or The Cossacks, where he talks about his time in the military, being stationed in Siberia, or just like the far-flung parts of the Russian Empire, where the Cossacks, where they're fighting the Cossacks, more or less. Interesting stuff. Tolstoy can get a bit preachy. Resurrection is a book that Tolstoy wrote that I always thought would make a good movie if they made like they did with like Coppola did with Apocalypse and with Heart of Darkness, and setting it in Vietnam. John Milius and Coppola did Apocalypse Now based on Heart of Darkness. I always thought uh, Resurrection would have made a great Vietnam movie, post Vietnam movie. But it is kind of preachy and stuff in the second half, so I wouldn't start with that one. I think that might be his last novel. Um, Anna Karenina is great. Just find a reasonable translation and just read them like normal books, and then don't be ashamed to break out Wikipedia. Wikipedia is pretty good for this now. It's even better than the books. Usually, the books will have a dramatis persona, all the list of characters, but the ones in Wikipedia are very useful. You go to the Wikipedia page, you go to they will have extensive lists of the characters and their relationships to each other for all the classic Russian novels. That's really all you need. Um, okay, so that is my first book or book and a half, if you want to count Dostoevsky, The Idiot, Demons, Russian novels in general. So those were hard but very rewarding because of the great storytelling, more than anything, in my opinion. People think they're meant to be browbeaten by these books, but I don't think they are. In my opinion. Okay. Oh, I had covers. I was going to do covers. To make it more visual for you. Okay, so I mean, don't really need covers for the Russian novels, and I actually didn't save any of those anyway. Next, I will go to a book that probably most people would not find that difficult now, or maybe they would because it's dated. At the time I happened to read it, it was very tough to read. Samuel R. Delany, Stars in My Pocket Like Grains of Sand. It was very rewarding. His books are typically very dense. His science fiction books, especially, he's written some more recent books. He moved kind of in the mainstream, and then he went back to science fiction with his last novel. But this one, and there's this one, or I could also say Dahlgren. This one had a particular futuristic. Well, it's set in a futuristic world. It's about like a guy who's homeless basically for a lot of it in this very baroque kind of opulent world. He's in that sense he's kind of a typical Delaney hero, but what I had trouble with getting into was, and I really appreciate, I don't think a writer would be allowed to do this in a mainstream novel today. I think the editors would give him a lot of shit for trying to do it this way, but there's a thing, this is far in the future, a thing where people call their lovers he, no matter what gender the lover is. And they call everyone else in the world she. So you can't really tell if a character is saying he looked at me like this, you can't tell if that person is male or female, or if like she gave me an order, she kicked me out. You can't tell if that person is male or female. It's just how he chose to do it for this, because Delaney is a person who's really his books are kind of really about unconventional relationships and sort of transgressive sexual relationships and stuff, and different ways of doing all that, of organizing all that. But it takes a while to get into it. Like, wait, you're reading and you go, I thought this was a man. Now he's saying she. What's going on? And but you know, things like that are difficult in a novel. When the author has the confidence in you, the trust in you as a reader to figure it out, it's very rewarding. So once you figure that out, it's much better than if he had just told you in a note in the front, or had some, alien character from another world going, why do they all do this here? But that did make it very, very difficult. According to this is the reason I'm showing this book. This is the copy that I had. This was supposed to be part of two books. This was supposed to be the first of a diptych, which is the word he used in there. It's like a Renaissance painting where you open it up and there's hell on one side and heaven on the other side, kind of, or two other scenes. But it's a science fiction diptych instead of a trilogy. So it's a bit pretentious way to say it, but I believe it's the only time it was ever used. But he never wrote the second book, and I think just too much time went by. He's written many books, not many, but he's written 5 or 6 novels since then. So that's never coming out. I forget. I think he's done interviews and explained why he can't write the other book. It's probably just he let it go on too long. Maybe he can hire George R. R. Martin to help him or something. That's a lame joke. Anyway, so that, when it comes to Delaney, this is another kind of book that's difficult. I wouldn't say this is that rewarding unless you're a Delaney completist, or if you just like to read the most sick and disgusting books ever. But even with this book, I reviewed it on my channel earlier this year. I don't recommend it, but but if you like stuff like this, it's the kind of stuff you like. But I don't think really most people need to subject themselves to it. I just felt like I should read it because it does come up on the most extreme books ever written, kind of thing. And I have a pretty thick skin. I'm not traumatized by things that I read. It is gross though, and about halfway through, it's a very short novel, I was done with it. But as I was trying to say, as I think I said in my Finnegan's Wake video, he's a writer I respect because he can write. He can write a straightforward story. This applies to people like Le Guin. It applies to Joyce. It applies to Delaney. It applies very much so to the next writer I'm going to talk about, or maybe the final writer I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about a poet before then, but they can write. They can write straightforward prose. They can tell a story in simple, direct prose. And when they choose not to, Attention must be paid. I think, in my opinion, it does. I give a writer credit if I've read something by them that makes sense. I'll go farther with them. I'll explore. I'll let them take me along farther if I've read uh, other books by them that are less ambitious or more straightforward or more commercial or whatever. I just think it's worth doing. If you like a person's commercial books, then you owe it to yourself, I believe, to at least go along with their experimental books, um, to see if they work as well or maybe even better for you. And if they don't, they don't. Then just go back to their early stuff. Le Guin's early books. A lot of people are reading the Hamish novels. Her, Le Guin's early stuff, her first 3, 4, 5 novels, whatever. They're so riveting. They're such great adventure stories. She went into a different mode. I don't know if she changed her style, she got sick of it, whatever. Um, but if you read Le Guin's on writing book, Steering the Craft, she talks about she rebels against the idea that the center of that the central the central what am I trying to say, that the essence of fiction is conflict. She says you don't have to have conflict in a novel. That's not the most important thing. You can have stories that don't have any conflict or very little conflict. And she kind of moved in that direction after Left Hand of Darkness, where she's kind of just like exploring worlds and stuff. I guess I'm going to put, I hadn't written this one down, but I am going to put Le Guin's The Dispossessed on a hard book uh, that I read that was very rewarding because there's not really much to move you along in the book. As far as I remember, The Dispossessed, the subtitle is an ambiguous utopia. It's about two worlds. It's about the politics of the two worlds. I believe it's socialist. It's been a long time since I read it too, but I enjoyed it. I really appreciate it. I understood what she's trying to do, but it's not riveting like her early planetary adventure stories are. And the change for me came in Left Hand of Darkness, which it seemed to me to want to be a non-conflict story, a story where it wasn't so much about the conflict, but it was about again, this gender kind of thing, like in Delaney, this gender kind of thing about this race of people who change change gender according to the season or something like that, and they have, they could both be both male and female. Female when it comes time to give birth. Uh, and then there's kind of this plot at the end, this like we got to go on the run, people are after us kind of plot. This is kind of really grafted on. It's like this wants to be a mainstream novel in a science fiction setting, not an adventure novel, but it feels like she was forced or just thought herself that the book needed to have this kind of adventure, this chase kind of stuff in it. It didn't really feel organic to the novel, so that's why I always had some problems with that. It's not that it was almost like it was too much like her early, more entertaining books, and where she really wanted to be writing stuff like the stuff she wrote after. And I'm, hot and cold on some of that stuff too, but I didn't really like the Earthsea books. I just don't really respond very much to young adult fiction or to young adult fantasy and the special boy who's a prince kind of thing. It's just never really been my bag. So, oh, my bag. Okay, I'm listening to the audiobook of the reason that's looked at. I'm listening to the audiobook of A Scanner Darkly, Philip K. Dick's, one of his later novels. Probably you would say that the beginning of his last period. The reason I got it, I read it before, like I'd say on every time when I have to justify reading audiobooks, I usually pick audiobooks as much as I can just for on my walks or whatever. I usually pick books that I've read before. So I read this a long time ago, but the reason I said my bag is the drug vernacular in this book, Scanner Darkly, which was written in the late 70s, set in a fictional 1994. It's pretty corny, my bag, man. It's not my bag, and the straits are bringing us down, man. But it's a great book. It's really is. I forgot a lot of stuff about it, but maybe I'll do a video on that sometime. Okay, the next one. This is another one that'll get me in trouble with reverse snobs. Like I talked about in the last video, that there's snobs and there's reverse snobs who look down on anything that's they perceive as pretentious. And maybe you could say this guy's pretentious, but I enjoy the hell out of him. John Ashbery. Collected poem. This is the Library of America edition, first volume of 2 volumes of John Ashbery's poems, collected poems 56 to 87. I've talked about him before. His poems make no sense to me at all. There are a couple that do. The first one I read by him was a poem called John Clare, which is a poem about the British poet, the uneducated, lower class, rural farmer poet Jean Clare, who is terrific writer, fantastic imagery in his poems. Had kind of a tragic life because he became kind of like an object of fascination because he was famous for being, only just a farmer and not like a fancy boy like most poets were supposed to be, and like not like Wordsworth or anybody. People would actually come to his town and gawk at him when he was trying to farm. Anyway, the first poem I read by him, by John Ashbery, is called John Clare, and it's a prose poem. It's just a block of text, but it's brilliant. I must have read it like 40 or 50 times. It was in some anthology. I'll see if I can find a copy of it and put a link to it. A lot of poems are available online. So then I decided to start reading John Ashbery, and his poems make no. Actually, I'd read some before. Let me take that back. I'd read a few before, and I couldn't understand them, and I just figured, okay, I'm just stupid. But then I found out nobody understands his poems. Maybe not even him, but they have this energy to them that I can't describe. That's extraordinary. Where you read a poem, it could be 2 pages, 1 pages, 5 pages, in my opinion at least, where you really feel like you've read something. You feel like you've read something. The language is beautiful. None of it makes any sense. It would be unfair to say that the poems are all part of one big poem, because they do have endings. And this is another thing he does that I don't understand. How, when he writes a poem that is full of nonsense, like just seems like random sentences, but they're not random, you can tell. And then you come to the end and it feels like it's over. Does that make sense, what I'm trying to say? So he is a very difficult poet to read. All you have to know is that nobody understands what he's talking about. I read part of an interview. I read an introduction from the interviewer about it, saying like he was so tough to talk to. He really can't explain what he's doing at all. So maybe he doesn't know. He has written other things. He was an art critic. I haven't read any of that. The poems John Clare that I mentioned, though, is just in praise of John Clare, and it is a bit stylistically difficult because it's just like one run-on paragraph, but it makes sense. So he does write some poems that make sense. So he can if he wants to. I don't know. I find his work very rewarding. The reason I put the book there that I did is I never bought the second book, and then I moved away. This is the kind of thing I was reading just before I retired. Terrific. You can read 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can read. I can't remember any particular poems except the one called John Clare. So, but he is a difficult writer in the sense that he doesn't make any sense. But he does make sense in the sense that he makes sense by not making sense. it's very late. It's 11 now. All right, the last book, the last one on my list is an author called William Burroughs, who, again, like I started to mention about Joyce and well, most of the ones I've read, if you read William Burroughs' first book, Junkie, you know he knows how to write hard boiled, lean prose that makes sense. He got bored with that pretty quickly, and he started writing experimental fiction. In fact, his most famous novel, his first big novel, was Naked Lunch. It's a novel only in the sense that people say it's a novel. He was he was in Tangier, I believe. He was just writing reams of stuff, and he sent it back to his friends in California, who just happened to be Allen Ginsberg and someone else whose name I can't remember. And they thought it was brilliant, which it is. Naked Lunch is brilliant. And they got it published as a beatnik novel. But he was just writing chunks of writing. And then he became pretty famous, at least in certain circles then. But what the books I want to talk about are his final trilogy called the Red Knight Trilogy. Now, some of his books between Naked Lunch and these, for example, Nova Express, which is a good one. He used this method called the cut-up method, invented by Brian Gysin and used later by David Bowie on song lyrics, where he would he would write some stuff and then he would cut it up and he would move the paragraphs around. So he's deliberately trying to make it not make sense so that he can find hidden meanings in it, or get the reader to discover their own meanings, kind of like the I Ching or something. In theory, these guys are all hippies and beatniks and druggies. And then so that really informed the rest of his career. But his final three novels, and there was a big gap from before these three novels where he didn't write for a while because he was kind of became more of a celebrity than a writer for a big chunk of his life. And he's got that famous voice that made him some money and spoken word records and things. I saw him on the street once, and I didn't realize it because I'm just dumb. He was doing a tour when I lived in San Francisco. He was doing a tour. I didn't go to see it. I think I probably knew people who did. With Laurie Anderson, William Burroughs and Laurie Anderson. Laurie Anderson, the performance artists, were doing a tour. It was on Market Street at one of the theaters that was converted into a performance space. I think it was at Strand, maybe, or the Egyptian. I don't know if it was permanently converted into it was like a big sort of version of a punk club. They would have acts like that. Anyway, so I'm walking there like 6 in the morning, probably going to work or something. And there's this old man who's really tall and gaunt and lean. And he's not dressed like anybody on Market Street because he's wearing a really nice suit, old fashioned 50s type hat. This would have been in the late 70s. He's got a top coat on, which you need in San Francisco, no matter what week of time of the year it is. And he's carrying, of all things, a clear plastic bag with a bottle of either vodka or gin in it. And he's leaning over a trash can, like looking at a newspaper or something, in front of the venue. And this is how stupid I am. I thought, that's so weird that this guy who looks like William Burroughs is in front of this venue, but it obviously would not be. It didn't even occur to me that it could be William Burroughs. Years later, I learned that he always walked around with a plastic bag with alcohol in it, like that. And I was, oh man, but how could I not know who that was? He was just obviously like walking around town, checking out the venue the morning before the show. Anyway, that's my William Burroughs story. Uh, Exciting, huh? So he wrote the Red Knight trilogy, which begins with Cities of the Red Knight, then goes on to the Place of Dead Roads. Can you see that? This has some very interesting scenes in it, some very interesting Western scenes, which I won't describe in the interest of time. But and then I think this is actually the best of the three. Oh, there's a quote from Gigi Ballard on it. Okay, I'll read that in a second. The Western Lands is his final novel, the end of the trilogy, and they're linked as a trilogy, not in the sense that it's one story of one group of characters, because there's really no characters and no stories. There's just movements through time, and Burroughs was very influenced by popular fiction, by um, science fiction. I'm talking about really like straightforward science fiction, like Henry Kuttner and Barrington Bailey. It was a big influence on Nova Express. Um, an early Barrington Bailey movie was, book was, and westerns, which come in a lot in the second book, The Place of Dead Roads, where we've got characters who are gunfighters. They're out in the street, and they're very violent gunfighting section. Then they go up to a hotel and they just have like extremely graphic, extensive gay sex. And there's some kind of parallel there between like sex and violence or something going on. The Western Land, so it's actually really beautiful. Let's see what J.G. Ballard said about it. Burroughs' visionary powers, his comic genius, and his unerring ability to crack the codes that make up the life of the century are undiminished. That was J.G. Ballard in a review, I suppose, in the Washington Post book world. Um, so J.G. Ballard was a person who respected Burroughs, who comes from the mainstream, more of the mainstream end of science fiction. But this book, and I believe this book, I believe William Burroughs credits in this volume, or maybe the whole trilogy, credits Norman Mailer's Ancient Evenings as the inspiration. And this book has many passages of a person preparing to go to the Western lands, which is, and just talking about how he's going to the Western lands, in which in Egyptian mythology is the afterlife, the the afterlife, the undiscovered country, whatever you want to call it. And it's really beautiful and magical book. It's a very lyrical book. So those, but it is difficult to follow those books. Not really. Probably if you just picked them up on the shelf, the way as I talked about in my other video, my aunt picked up Ulysses without having any kind of context. They might be confusing, like what are these books? But they're not hard if you follow the writer's career. If you go into it with a little generosity of spirit and realize that they're not trying to pull one over on you, which I think is a problem with difficult books have, is a lot of people seem to think it's a big trick. But it's not. They're doing the best they can to make something uh, personal, unique, and visionary. And sometimes they fail, and then sometimes they succeed, and that's life. Okay, that's the tag. Thank you.